The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its crystalline dome reaching toward the stars of the Andromeda system. Today, representatives from 47 species gathered in their designated atmospheric zones, each breathing their preferred mixture of gases, while universal translators hummed softly in the background. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat in the human delegation area, her fingers drumming silently against the smooth surface of her chair. Around her, the other human representatives maintained their poker faces, but she could feel the tension radiating from each of them like heat from a forge. This was supposed to be the day that ended 3 years of brutal conflict across 17 star systems. The Zephyrian High Counselor, a being that resembled a walking tree made of silver metal, activated the central holographic display. Star charts materialized in the air, showing the disputed territories in pulsing red. The outer rim systems, rich with rare minerals and habitable worlds, had been the source of endless skirmishes between human colonial ships and the established alien powers. We gather today to finalize the Concordat of shared space, the High Counselor announced, his voice carrying the sound of wind through metal chimes. The terms have been negotiated for standard months. All that remains is the signing. Sarah's jaw tightened as she reviewed the data pad containing the final treaty terms. The document represented everything wrong with the Galactic Council's approach to human expansion. Humans would be restricted to 15% of the disputed systems, despite having discovered and initially colonized 60% of them. Their military vessels would be limited in number and firepower. Most insulting of all, human colonies would require council oversight for any expansion beyond their assigned boundaries. The Krillian representative, a creature with 4 arms and crystalline skin, gestured toward the human section. The terms are generous, considering humanity's recent arrival to galactic civilization. Your species has shown remarkable enthusiasm for expansion. This treaty provides structure to prevent future conflicts. Structure, Sarah repeated, standing slowly. The word felt bitter in her mouth. You mean chains? A ripple of movement went through the assembly as translators worked overtime to convey the emotional undertones of her words. The Vorthan delegate, floating in his environmental sphere filled with methane gas, pulsed a deep purple color that indicated confusion. Ambassador Chun, the High Counselor said, his tone remaining diplomatic, surely you recognize the fairness of these terms. Your species has been granted significant territory and autonomy. The Council merely seeks to prevent the unfortunate incidents that have marked recent years. Sarah looked around the massive hall at the assembled representatives. Species that had ruled space for millennia, who viewed humanity as upstart children playing with dangerous toys. They had never faced a real challenge to their established order until humans arrived with their crude but effective ships and their stubborn refusal to follow anyone else's rules. Unfortunate incidents, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. Is that what we're calling the Battle of New Geneva? When your peacekeeping fleet opened fire on civilian transports. The hegemony representative, a being whose body seemed to be made of living shadow, spoke with a voice like grinding stone. Those transports were entering restricted space without proper authorization. Standard protocol was followed. Standard protocol. Sarah's laugh had no humor in it. 3,000 colonists, including 800 children, dead because they crossed an imaginary line that your council drew without consulting anyone who actually lived in those systems. The hall fell silent except for the whisper of air recyclers and the soft hum of translation devices. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon her, could sense their confusion and growing irritation at her defiance. The treaty before us today, Sarah continued, asks humanity to accept responsibility for conflicts we didn't start, to surrender territory we discovered and settled, and to place our future expansion under the oversight of species who have already demonstrated their willingness to destroy human lives to maintain their vision of order. She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, no larger than her palm. Every security sensor in the hall immediately focused on it, but the device emitted no threatening energy signatures. It was simply a recorder containing her government's final response to the treaty negotiations. The United Colonies of Earth have instructed me to deliver their formal response to the Concordat of shared space. She placed the device on the central podium where it projected a simple holographic message in the common galactic script. The message contained only 4 words: terms rejected. Negotiations concluded. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the shocked chittering of the insectoid hive queen's translator working to process concepts that didn't exist in her species' social structure. The idea of simply walking away from negotiations, of refusing to compromise, was alien to most galactic civilizations. Ambassador, the High Counselor said slowly, surely this is a negotiating position. The Council is prepared to discuss minor modifications to the terms. Sarah shook her head. There's nothing to discuss. Humanity rejects the fundamental premise that we need anyone's permission to explore, settle, or defend ourselves in space. We reject the idea that our expansion threatens galactic stability. Most importantly, we reject the notion that might makes right, regardless of how many species subscribe to that philosophy. The Krillian representative's crystalline skin flashed angry red patterns. Your species cannot simply ignore galactic law. The Council has maintained peace for over 3,000 years. Peace for who? Sarah asked. Not for the dozen species that were relocated when you needed their systems for strategic bases. Not for the mining colonies that were strip-mined to extinction to fuel your fleets. You've maintained peace by ensuring that no one was strong enough to challenge you. That era is ending. She gathered her materials and stood, followed by the other human representatives. The movement sent a wave of shock through the assembly as dozens of species realized that the humans were actually leaving. The Council will not forget this insult, the shadow being hissed. There will be consequences for this defiance. Sarah paused at the threshold of the human section, turning back to address the assembly one final time. Consequences? You mean like declaring our colonies illegal? Like imposing economic sanctions? Like sending fleets to enforce your will? She smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several alien representatives shift uncomfortably in their environmental suits. You've already tried all of that. We're still here. We're still expanding. And now we're done pretending that your approval matters to us. As the human delegation walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoed through the vast hall with a finality that seemed to hang in the air long after they disappeared. Behind them, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. For 3,000 years, no species had simply walked away from council negotiations. No one had ever rejected the fundamental authority of the galactic order and announced their intention to operate outside it entirely. The humans had just shattered a precedent older than some civilizations. In the days that followed, as news of the walkout spread across communication networks spanning the galaxy, 3 things became clear to the watching universe. First, humanity had just declared their independence from an order that had never before been successfully challenged. Second, the Galactic Council faced a threat unlike any in their history. Not a military invasion or terrorist uprising, but the simple rejection of their authority by a species strong enough to make that rejection stick. Third, and perhaps most ominously, the humans had walked away with something that no one in that grand hall had recognized until it was too late. They had walked away with the initiative, leaving behind a council that had built their entire power structure around the assumption that everyone would eventually come to the negotiating table and accept whatever terms were offered. That assumption had just been proven catastrophically wrong. And in the vast strategic calculus of galactic politics, the species that controlled the initiative controlled everything else. The age of unchallenged council authority was over, ended not by conquest or revolution, but by the simple act of humans turning their backs and walking away. 3 weeks after the walkout, Fleet Admiral Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UCS Defiance, humanity's newest dreadnought, watching as his tactical display updated with incoming intelligence reports. The ship hung in space near the edge of the Ross 128 system, one of the disputed territories that the Council's treaty would have handed over to Zephyrian control. Admiral, his communications officer called out, "We're receiving priority transmissions from 17 different Council member species. They're all demanding immediate withdrawal from this system." Rodriguez didn't look up from his display. At 63, he had spent 40 years building humanity's first true interstellar fleet, transforming what had begun as converted mining vessels and exploration ships into a force that had held off the combined might of 6 alien civilizations. Any of those demands backed by actual fleets? Negative, sir. Long-range sensors show no Council military assets within 3 light-years. Then, file their demands under strongly worded letters and continue with the operation. Below them, the planet Ross 128b was undergoing rapid transformation. Massive atmospheric processors worked around the clock to convert the world's methane-heavy air into something breathable for humans. Automated mining platforms extracted rare earth elements from the planet's crust, feeding raw materials to orbital shipyards that had been under construction since the first human survey teams had claimed the system. The Council had labeled this world as strategically important to Zephyrian interests, despite the fact that the tree-like aliens couldn't actually survive in its environment without massive technological support. They wanted it because it sat along a major hyperspace route that connected 3 sectors of Council space. The humans wanted it because it was perfect for terraforming and rich in the materials needed to build more ships. Status report on the Omega Protocol implementation, Rodriguez ordered. His tactical officer, Commander Sarah Kim, pulled up a galaxy-wide display. Red dots marked human colonies and outposts, while blue showed Council territories. Over the past 3 weeks, the pattern had shifted dramatically. Phase 1 is 93% complete, Admiral. All human colonies have withdrawn from Council communication networks and trade systems. Economic ties have been severed across the board. Phase 2. In progress. We've established independent supply chains between our colonies. The Vega Industrial Complex is producing ships at 140% of projected capacity. Mars Orbital is manufacturing weapons and defensive systems around the clock. The asteroid mining operations in the Sol system alone are providing more raw materials than the entire Council allocation would have allowed us under the treaty. Rodriguez nodded grimly. The Omega Protocol was humanity's contingency plan, developed in secret over the past year as negotiations with the Council had become increasingly one-sided. If diplomacy failed, humanity would not simply roll over and accept whatever terms were dictated to them. They would become completely self-sufficient and expand aggressively into any territory they could defend. What about the other species? Rodriguez asked. Any of them showing signs of following our example? Commander Kim highlighted several star systems in yellow. Intelligence reports indicate that the Tellarian Republic has stopped participating in Council economic programs. The Free Traders Alliance has declared 3 systems to be independent commercial zones outside Council jurisdiction. Most interesting of all, the Refugee Coalition has started expanding into unclaimed space without requesting Council permission. The Refugee Coalition was exactly what its name suggested: the scattered remnants of species that had been displaced, conquered, or absorbed by the major galactic powers over the millennia. They had always been considered insignificant, existing on the fringes of Council space, and surviving on whatever scraps the major species were willing to share. But humanity's walkout had done more than simply remove one species from the Council's sphere of influence. It had proven that the Council's authority existed only as long as people chose to recognize it. And that revelation was spreading. Sir, the communications officer spoke up again. Incoming transmission from the hegemony. It's marked as urgent and is requesting immediate response. Put it through. The main view screen flickered and displayed the familiar shadow form of the hegemony representative from the peace talks. The being's voice carried more edge than it had in the Grand Assembly Hall. Admiral Rodriguez, I am Executor Vorth. We need to discuss your species' recent decisions. Rodriguez clasped his hands behind his back. I wasn't aware there was anything to discuss. As Ambassador Chen made clear, humanity has concluded negotiations with the Council. Your forces are occupying systems that have been designated for other species under existing treaties. This cannot be allowed to continue. Existing treaties that we never signed and were never consulted about, Rodriguez replied. We're occupying systems that we discovered, explored, and settled. I'm not sure what claim the Council or its member species have to worlds they've never set foot on. The shadow being's form rippled with agitation. The legal framework of galactic civilization cannot simply be ignored because one species finds it inconvenient. There are procedures, protocols that have maintained order for millennia. And how has that order worked out for the species that aren't part of your council? Rodriguez gestured to his tactical officer, who brought up a historical display showing the galactic map from 1,000 years ago. Dozens of species that had once controlled significant territory were now reduced to small enclaves or had disappeared entirely. Your procedures and protocols seem to have a remarkable correlation with the expansion of council member territories and the contraction of everyone else's, Rodriguez continued. Perhaps it's time for a new approach. You cannot sustain this independence, Executor Vorth said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child. Your species lacks the industrial capacity, the resource networks, the technological base to operate outside the galactic economy. You will find yourselves isolated, falling behind technologically, vulnerable to any species willing to take what you've built. Rodriguez smiled, the expression visible even to the alien through the view screen's transmission. Executor, with respect, you clearly don't understand what you're dealing with. Let me enlighten you. He nodded to Commander Kim, who began displaying real-time production statistics from across human space. In the past 3 weeks, we've increased our industrial output by 60%. Our shipyards are producing vessels at a rate that exceeds anything we achieved while participating in council trade networks. Our colonies are expanding faster than they have since the first wave of interstellar settlement. The statistics were impressive, but Rodriguez knew they told only part of the story. The real secret was something the aliens had never understood about humanity. They thought like a collective, making decisions based on consensus and long-term stability. Humans thought like individuals, capable of rapid adaptation and willing to take enormous risks if the potential payoff was large enough. But the most important thing you need to understand, Rodriguez continued, is that we're not alone in this. Your own intelligence networks must have reported the movements of the Talarians, the Free Traders, and the Refugee Coalition. What do you think happens when every species in the galaxy realizes that the Council's authority is optional? The shadow beings' form seemed to contract. You're suggesting chaos, the breakdown of all interstellar order. I'm suggesting freedom, the opportunity for species to determine their own destiny without having to ask permission from powers that may not have their best interests at heart. Rodriguez leaned forward. Tell me, Executor, when was the last time the hegemony had to worry about another species challenging your control of your home systems? The question hung in the air unanswered. The answer is never, Rodriguez said, because the council system ensures that no one ever becomes strong enough to challenge the established powers. But that system only works if everyone agrees to participate in it. And we don't. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in silence. Rodriguez stared at the blank view screen for a moment before turning to his crew. Set course for the Kepler 442 system. We have 3 more worlds to fortify before the Council figures out how to respond to this. And transmit our latest industrial reports to every human colony and outpost. I want them to know that independence is not only possible, it's profitable. As the Dreadnought's massive engines engaged, pushing the vessel toward its next destination, Rodriguez reflected on the conversation with the hegemony executor. The alien had been right about one thing. Humanity's actions were leading toward the breakdown of the existing interstellar order. But what the executor failed to understand was that some orders deserved to be broken, especially when they were built on the premise that some species were inherently more deserving of freedom and prosperity than others. The humans weren't trying to destroy galactic civilization. They were trying to replace it with something better. And, based on the intelligence reports coming in from across the galaxy, they weren't the only ones who thought it was time for a change. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the same grand hall where humanity had walked away from peace talks 6 weeks earlier. But the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Where once there had been the calm confidence of established authority, now there was barely controlled panic as representatives from the major galactic powers struggled to comprehend the scope of what they faced. High Counselor Thranks stood before the central display, his metallic tree-like form showing signs of stress as his normally silver surface had taken on a dull, tarnished appearance. The holographic projection behind him showed a galactic map that would have been unthinkable just 2 months ago. Red zones marked territories that had declared independence from Council authority. What had begun as a scattering of human colonies had spread like wildfire across 3 spiral arms. The Talarian Republic had officially withdrawn from all Council treaties. The Free Traders Alliance had established the Independent Commerce Zone spanning 12 systems. Most shocking of all, the Refugee Coalition had not only expanded into unclaimed space, but had begun actively challenging minor Council species for control of resource-rich worlds. The situation has escalated beyond anything in our recorded history. High Counselor Thrinks announced, his voice carrying none of the measured authority that had once characterized Council proceedings. We face not merely a single rebellious species, but a fundamental challenge to the order that has maintained galactic stability for 3 millennia. The hegemony's executor Vorth materialized from his shadow form transport, his presence darker and more threatening than usual. The humans must bear responsibility for this chaos. Their defiance has given every minor species delusions of independence. We should have acted decisively after their walkout. And done what? The Krillian representative's crystalline skin flickered through rapid color changes, betraying agitation that her species rarely displayed in public. Destroyed their colonies? Committed genocide? That would have proven their point about the Council's true nature. The question highlighted the fundamental problem the Council faced. For thousands of years, their authority had been maintained through a combination of economic dependency and the implicit threat of overwhelming force. Species stayed in line because leaving meant isolation and vulnerability to stronger neighbors. But the humans had proven that isolation wasn't necessarily weakness, and their example was inspiring others to test the boundaries of Council power. The humans have done something that we failed to anticipate, admitted the Vorthan delegate from within his methane-filled environmental sphere. His pulsing colors showed deep concern. They have made independence seem achievable. Every species with grievances against Council policy now sees an alternative to compliance. A new voice entered the discussion as the representative from the Centauri Federation activated his communication link. My government has instructed me to inform the Council that we are reassessing our participation in several economic treaties. The benefits of Council membership no longer seem to outweigh the restrictions on our sovereignty. The statement hit the Assembly like a physical blow. The Centauri Federation wasn't a fringe species or a collection of refugees. They were one of the original 12 founding members of the modern Council, with territory spanning 37 star systems and industrial capacity that rivaled any other member species. You cannot seriously be considering following the humans into isolation, the Zephyrian High Counselor said, his metallic surface darkening to an almost black hue. The Federation has been part of Council structure since its inception, which is precisely why we have a unique perspective on how that structure has evolved, the Centauri representative replied coldly. We remember when Council membership meant mutual cooperation and shared decision-making. What it has become is a system where a handful of powerful species dictate terms to everyone else, justified by appeals to stability and order. High Counselor Thrinks gestured toward the tactical display, where new data was being uploaded in real time. The humans and their allies are expanding at an unprecedented rate. Our intelligence services report that they have established 17 new colonies in the past month alone, all in systems that were designated for Council development under existing territorial agreements. Territorial agreements that were made without consulting the species actually capable of developing those systems, Executor Vorth pointed out with bitter irony. Perhaps our predecessors should have considered the long-term implications of claiming authority over territory they couldn't effectively control. The admission was remarkable coming from a hegemony representative. For the first time in Council memory, one of the major powers was acknowledging that their territorial claims might have been overreaching. What's more concerning, continued the intelligence briefing, is the technological advancement we're observing in human space. They've developed new ship designs that don't conform to any known specifications. Their energy weapons show efficiency ratings that exceed our best estimates by 30%. Most troubling of all, they appear to have made significant breakthroughs in faster-than-light travel. This last point caused a stir throughout the assembly. FTL technology had been relatively stagnant for centuries, with incremental improvements in speed and efficiency, but no fundamental breakthroughs. The Council's major species had grown comfortable with their technological advantages, assuming that any newcomer species would need centuries to match their capabilities. How is this possible? Demanded the Crystalline Republic's representative. Human technology was assessed as being at least 50 years behind Council standards when they first made contact. They learn differently than we do, admitted the chief intelligence analyst, a multi-armed being from the Confederation of Linked Worlds. Most species develop technology through careful, methodical research guided by established scientific principles. Humans employ what they call trial and error on a massive scale. They're willing to test thousands of failed approaches to find one that works. That's not advancement, that's chaos, the hegemony's executor objected. It's chaos that produces results faster than our systematic approaches, the analyst replied. In the time it takes us to complete one carefully planned research project, human scientists and engineers complete dozens of experimental attempts. Their failure rate is enormous, but so is their rate of breakthrough discovery. The implications were staggering. The Council's superiority had always been based on accumulated knowledge and technological advancement developed over millennia. If humans could match that advancement in decades rather than centuries, then the fundamental balance of galactic power was shifting rapidly. There's something else, the analyst continued reluctantly. The humans appear to be sharing their technological advances with their allies. The refugee coalition fleets now carry weapons and defensive systems that show clear human engineering principles. The Talarian Republic has begun using human ship designs for their expanded territorial patrols. High Counselor Thrinks processed this information with growing alarm. A single species developing faster than expected was manageable. An alliance of species sharing advanced technology and coordinating expansion was an existential threat to Council authority. What are our options? He asked. The question hung in the air for several minutes before anyone attempted an answer. Finally, the Krillian representative spoke. Military intervention is problematic. Human defensive capabilities appear to be significantly more advanced than our intelligence estimated. Their alliance with the refugee coalition provides them with detailed knowledge of Council fleet tactics and capabilities. Any military action would likely result in heavy casualties with uncertain outcomes. Economic pressure? Ineffective. They've established completely independent supply chains and trade networks. Our economic leverage was always based on access to Council markets and resources. They no longer need either. Diplomatic isolation? The Centauri Federation representative answered this one. Impossible. Too many Council member species are quietly reassessing their own positions. Any attempt to isolate the humans diplomatically would likely result in more species leaving the Council rather than the humans returning to negotiations. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council faced a challenge that couldn't be resolved through any of their traditional tools of power and influence. Perhaps, said a new voice from the back of the assembly, it's time to consider that the humans might have a point. The speaker was the representative from the Minor Worlds Alliance, a collection of small species that had always been among the Council's most compliant members. The fact that even they were questioning Council policy indicated just how dramatically the situation had shifted. What are you suggesting? High Counselor Thrinks asked carefully. I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't human defiance. Maybe the problem is a system that makes defiance seem like the only viable option for species that want to determine their own futures. The statement was simple, but it struck at the heart of everything the Council had built. And, as the assembled representatives looked around the grand hall at each other, each could see the same uncomfortable realization forming. The age of unquestioned Council authority was over, and they had no idea what was going to replace it. Outside the hall, across dozens of star systems, human ships continued their expansion into unclaimed space, building new worlds and establishing new trade routes. They weren't waiting for the Council to figure out how to respond to their challenge. They were simply moving forward, creating the future they wanted rather than accepting the one that had been planned for them. Admiral Chun Wei stood in the command center of Titan Station, humanity's newest military installation, watching as holographic displays showed the most significant fleet movement in galactic history. The station hung in the void between two gas giants in the Proxima Centauri system, its massive bulk bristling with weapons that would have been science fiction just a year ago. "Admiral," reported Captain Jackson from the tactical station. "Long-range sensors confirm it. Council forces from 7 different species, converging on the Kepler 442 system. Fleet strength estimated at over 400 vessels." Chen nodded grimly. They had known this moment would come eventually. 3 months after humanity's walkout from the peace talks, the Galactic Council had finally decided that military action was their only remaining option. The target they had chosen was strategically perfect. Kepler 442 was humanity's newest major colony, far from Earth and isolated enough that its destruction might not trigger immediate retaliation. What the Council didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario. "Status of Operation Lighthouse?" Chen asked. "All human fleets report ready," replied Commander Martinez from the communications station. "The Refugee Coalition Task Force is in position. The Talarian Republic has confirmed their participation. Most surprisingly, we've received confirmation from the Centauri Federation. They're officially joining the defense of Kepler 442. The Centauri Federation's decision to openly oppose a Council military action marked a point of no return. They were one of the founding member species, and their participation in humanity's defense would be seen as betrayal by the other major galactic powers. But it also meant that this was no longer just about humanity's right to independence." Chen walked to the strategic overview display, where the galactic situation was laid out in stark detail. Red showed the approaching Council fleet. Blue indicated human forces. Green marked their allies. The pattern that emerged was remarkable. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a coalition of species was preparing to meet a Council enforcement action with organized resistance. "Open a channel to all allied commanders," Chen ordered. "Priority Alpha encryption." The display shifted to show the faces of fleet commanders from across 3 spiral arms. Admiral Rodriguez from the UCS Defiance. Captain Kithira of the Refugee Coalition flagship Unbroken. Commander Talthak from the Talarian Republic's newest dreadnought. Most remarkably, Admiral Vexhari from the Centauri Federation, whose presence in this group would have been unthinkable just months ago. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings," Chen began. "Today we face the moment that will determine whether the galaxy moves forward into a new era of freedom and cooperation, or backwards into an age of enforced compliance through superior firepower." Admiral Rodriguez spoke first. "Chen, our intelligence suggests the Council believes this will be a simple police action. They expect to destroy Kepler 442's defenses and force us back to negotiations from a position of weakness." "Let me guess," Admiral Vexhari interjected, her Centauri features showing the kind of bitter amusement her species was known for. "They plan to offer generous terms after demonstrating their overwhelming force." "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "Which means they haven't learned the most important lesson about dealing with humans." "Which is?" asked Captain Kithira, the Refugee Coalition commander whose species had been displaced by Council action centuries ago. Chen smiled. And there was something in that expression that would have been familiar to any human who had ever studied military history. "We don't negotiate from positions of weakness. We create positions of strength." She gestured to the tactical display, which updated to show not just the immediate battle space around Kepler 442, but the entire strategic situation across dozens of star systems. Operation Lighthouse isn't just about defending one colony. It's about demonstrating that the age of Council military superiority is over. The display showed movement patterns that had been developing over the past week. Human fleets weren't just converging on Kepler 442. They were positioning themselves throughout Council space, near major industrial systems, trade routes, and command centers. While the Council has been gathering their forces for this demonstration of power, Chen continued, "We've been positioning ourselves to respond to their demonstration with one of our own." Commander Talthak from the Talarian Republic leaned forward. "You're planning simultaneous strikes across Council territory?" "Not strikes," Chen corrected. "Liberations. Every minor species that has been forced to accept Council oversight. every colony that has been restricted in their development, every trade route that has been monopolized by major powers. All of them are about to discover that the Council's protection isn't as absolute as they've been led to believe. The scope of what she was describing was breathtaking. Not just a military victory, but a fundamental restructuring of galactic power relationships in a matter of days. The Council has made a critical strategic error, Chen explained. They've concentrated their forces for a single decisive battle, leaving their own territory vulnerable. They've also revealed which species they consider reliable enough to participate in military action against us. The implication was clear. Any species not represented in the Council fleet was either considered untrustworthy by the major powers or had actively refused to participate in military action against humanity's allies. Both categories represented potential new allies in the coming conflict. Admiral Vexhari pulled up her own tactical display. My government has confirmed that the Crystalline Republic, the Minor Worlds Alliance, and the Independent Systems Confederation all declined to contribute forces to the Council fleet. The Hegemony, Zephyrians, and Krillians are providing the bulk of the ships and commanders. Which means, Admiral Rodriguez added, that we're not just fighting the Council. We're fighting the species that have used the Council as a tool to maintain their dominance over everyone else. The ones who have the most to lose if the current system changes. Chen nodded. Exactly. And that's why Operation Lighthouse will succeed. We're not fighting for conquest or domination. We're fighting for the right of every species to determine their own future. Half the galaxy will be cheering for us to win. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the sensor stations. Admiral, reported the tactical officer, the Council fleet has just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. They're broadcasting demands for immediate surrender. Chen looked around at the faces of her allied commanders. Any second thoughts? The responses came without hesitation. The refugee coalition has been waiting 300 years for this chance, said Captain Kithira. The Talarian Republic stands ready, confirmed Commander Talthak. The Centauri Federation will not back down, declared Admiral Vexhari. Then, let's show the galaxy what freedom looks like, Admiral Rodriguez added. Chen turned to her communications officer. Transmit to the Council fleet. Message reads, surrender demands rejected. Terms for your withdrawal are as follows. Immediate cessation of military action, recognition of the independence of all allied species and territories, and agreement to negotiate a new framework for galactic relations based on equality rather than dominance. You have 30 minutes to respond. The absurdity of demanding surrender from a fleet that outnumbered them would have been laughable under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. The humans and their allies weren't planning to win through superior numbers. They were planning to win through superior strategy, technology, and the simple fact that they were fighting for something the Council fleet couldn't understand. The principle that freedom was worth any risk. All allied fleets, Chen broadcast, Operation Lighthouse is now active. Show the galaxy that the age of enforced submission is over. Today we fight not just for our own independence, but for the independence of every species that has been told they're too small, too weak, or too insignificant to deserve self-determination. As her words echoed across the communication networks of dozens of fleets positioned throughout the galaxy, Chen felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. In the next few hours, either humanity and its allies would prove that the galactic order could be changed through courage and determination, or they would be crushed as an example to any other species that might consider challenging established authority. But as she watched the tactical displays showing Allied ships moving into position across 3 spiral arms, Chen felt no doubt about the outcome. The Council had spent 3,000 years believing that power came from controlling others. They were about to learn that true power came from inspiring others to stand up for themselves. /1 year after the Battle of Kepler 442, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood once again in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council. But everything had changed. The hall itself had been reconstructed to accommodate twice as many species, with new atmospheric zones and communication systems designed for radically different forms of life. The council that had once represented 47 species now hosted delegations from over 130 independent civilizations. The change hadn't come through conquest or military occupation. It had come through example, inspiration, and the simple demonstration that alternatives to the old order were possible. The battle that had begun as the Council's attempt to destroy human independence had lasted exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes. When it ended, the Council fleet had been scattered, their command structure shattered, and 3 of their major member species were facing internal revolts on their home worlds. But, more importantly, 17 previously unknown species had emerged from hidden colonies and forgotten systems to declare their independence, inspired by broadcasts of the battle that had reached across the galaxy in real time. The Galactic Cooperation Assembly hereby calls this session to order, announced Coordinator Vexhari, the former Centauri Federation admiral who had accepted the role of leading the new organization that had replaced the old council. The title was deliberately modest. No one wanted another system where a few powerful species dominated everyone else. Sarah looked around the vast hall at representatives from species she was still learning about. The silent observers, who communicated through chemical signals and had remained hidden for millennia. The collective minds, multiple species that had achieved technological integration and spoke with one voice. The deep wanderers, nomadic fleets that had roamed between galaxies and were only now settling into permanent relationships with local civilizations. The old council had claimed to represent galactic civilization while knowing about less than half the intelligent species that actually existed. The new assembly was still discovering just how diverse and complex the real galaxy truly was. First item of business, Coordinator Vexhari continued, is the final ratification of the Kepler Accords on species autonomy and mutual cooperation. The Kepler Accords were humanity's alternative to the old council treaties. Instead of establishing hierarchies and spheres of influence, they created a framework for independent species to cooperate voluntarily while maintaining complete sovereignty over their own territories and development decisions. The principles were simple. No species could claim authority over territory they didn't actually occupy and develop. No species could restrict another species' expansion into unclaimed space. All trade and cooperation agreements had to be bilateral and voluntary, with either party free to withdraw at any time. Military alliances were permitted but could never be used to enforce compliance with economic or political arrangements. Most importantly, any species could join or leave the assembly at will, and participation in assembly programs was entirely voluntary. The vote on ratification, announced Vexhari, is unanimous among the 137 participating species. Sarah felt a moment of profound satisfaction. The unanimity wasn't the result of pressure or coercion. It was because the Accords offered something that no galactic organization had ever provided before: genuine freedom of choice. Second item of business, Vexhari continued. Status report on the former council territories. This was more complex. The hegemony, Krillians, and Zephyrians had initially refused to participate in the new assembly, retreating to their core systems and attempting to maintain their old sphere of influence approach to galactic relations. It hadn't worked. Within months of the Battle of Kepler 442, dozens of species that had been under council oversight declared independence. Some joined the assembly immediately. Others formed their own regional alliances. A few chose complete isolation, having had enough of galactic politics entirely. The result was a galaxy where power was distributed among hundreds of independent actors rather than concentrated in the hands of a few major species. It was messier, more chaotic, and infinitely more free. The hegemony has requested formal membership in the assembly, reported the status coordinator, a being whose species had only been discovered 6 months ago when they emerged from deep space to investigate the new galactic situation. Their internal government has undergone significant restructuring since their client species declared independence. They're now organized as a federal democracy rather than an imperial hierarchy. Sarah wasn't entirely surprised. The hegemony's power had always been based on controlling other species. When those species gained the freedom to choose their own paths, the hegemony had been forced to find new ways to organize their society. The Zephyrians have established the Trisong Confederation with 17 other plant-based species, the coordinator continued. They formally apologized for their previous attempts to claim authority over worlds unsuitable for their own habitation and have requested observer status while they adapt to the new galactic environment. And the Krillians? The Krillian Crystalline Republic has undergone fragmentation. Approximately 40% of their worlds have joined the Assembly as independent systems. 30% have formed a new organization called the Crystal Gardens Collective. The remaining 30% are still attempting to maintain the old council structure, but with limited success. The fragmentations weren't failures of the new system, they were features of it. Species that had been forced into artificial unity under council pressure were now free to organize themselves according to their actual cultural, political, and economic preferences. Third item of business, Vexhari announced humanity's proposal for the Universal Exploration Initiative. Sarah stood to address the assembly. The proposal was ambitious even by human standards, a collaborative effort to explore beyond the current galaxy, seeking out new forms of life and intelligence among the stars of neighboring galactic clusters. Fellow beings, she began. 1 year ago, humanity walked away from negotiations because we rejected the premise that our expansion and development should be limited by someone else's vision of order. Today, we propose taking that principle to its logical conclusion. The holographic display activated, showing images of distant galaxies photographed by the Assembly's most advanced telescopes. There are billions of galaxies within our observable universe, and potentially billions more beyond that. While we've been arguing over the division of territory in this one galaxy, entire universes of possibility have been waiting for us to reach them. The proposal was to pool resources and technology from any species willing to participate, creating exploration fleets capable of intergalactic travel. Not conquest fleets, exploration fleets, designed to make contact with whatever civilizations they found and offer friendship, trade, and cooperation. Some of you may wonder why humanity, having fought so hard for independence, would propose such an ambitious collaborative project, Sarah continued. The answer is that we didn't fight for independence so we could be alone. We fought for independence so we could choose our own alliances and cooperation agreements based on mutual respect rather than imposed authority. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species stood to volunteer resources, technology, and personnel for the exploration initiative. The silent observers offered their advanced sensor technology. The deep wanderers shared their knowledge of intergalactic navigation. The collective minds provided computational resources for analyzing the vast amounts of data that would be generated. Even more remarkably, several species that hadn't joined the assembly expressed interest in participating in the exploration project. The old council system had made cooperation conditional on political submission. The new approach made cooperation possible without requiring any surrender of sovereignty. Finally, Coordinator Vexhari announced, "We come to the anniversary declaration." This was the part Sarah had been looking forward to most. Every year, on the anniversary of humanity's walkout from the original peace talks, the Assembly would issue a declaration reaffirming their commitment to the principles that had made their cooperation possible. 1 year ago, Vexhari read from the prepared statement, one species demonstrated that the word no could change the galaxy. Today, 137 species demonstrate that the word yes, freely chosen and voluntarily given, can build something better than anyone imagined possible. We declare to the universe that freedom is not a privilege granted by the powerful to the weak, but a fundamental right of all intelligent life. We declare that cooperation achieved through inspiration is stronger than compliance enforced through threat. We declare that diversity of thought, culture, and approach is not a source of conflict to be managed, but a source of strength to be celebrated. We are not perfect. We are not without disagreements. But we are free to disagree, free to choose our own paths, and free to help each other achieve goals that none of us could accomplish alone. As the declaration concluded, Sarah found herself thinking about that moment 1 year ago when she had placed humanity's rejection of the Council Treaty on the central podium and walked away from 3,000 years of established galactic order. She had walked away because the terms offered were unacceptable. She had walked away because humanity refused to accept limitations imposed by species who didn't understand human nature or human goals. She had walked away because sometimes the only way to get respect is to demonstrate that you don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. But, most importantly, she had walked away because she believed that the galaxy could be better than it was. Looking around the assembly hall at representatives from species that had been enemies, strangers, or unknowns just a year ago, all working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system, Sarah knew that belief had been justified. The humans had walked away from peace talks, but they had walked towards something much more valuable than peace imposed by superior force. They had walked toward a galaxy where peace was possible because everyone was free to choose it. And that, Sarah reflected as she watched species from across 3 spiral arms planning their joint exploration of distant galaxies, was worth any risk humanity had taken to achieve it. The age of enforced order was over. The age of chosen cooperation had begun, and the universe was vast enough for both freedom and friendship to flourish among the stars.